sort of objections to that. We won't record the sessions during the virtual breaks, the virtual refreshment breaks and networking sessions, but we will record the main sessions. So just if I can just welcome everybody today. So thank you all for coming along to today. This is the first event that we've done of this nature, and as many of you probably know, this is all part of the activities we've been doing as part of National Careers Week 2021. And this is the third year that we've actually got involved in it, both from CIH's point of view, but from the wider housing profession's point of view as well. And if you're active on social media, you might have seen quite a lot of the activity that we've been doing during this week, and it has mainly been through social media activity, just as the nature of the beast today, really. So as part of some of the things that we've been sharing, we've been getting housing organisations and housing professionals to celebrate their profession, to celebrate why they love working in the housing sector. We've been sharing many blogs and many social media quotes as well about why people have chosen to follow their career path within the housing profession, and also some top tips as well. So ultimately, National Careers Week at its source is aimed at encouraging younger people, school-age pupils, to come into different professions and to think about their career options. CIH and us as a wider profession, we actually use it as a way of sort of springboarding our message about why we want to shout about the housing profession. So in some of the things that we will push out during National Careers Week, it's more about this is why we're really proud. This is why we feel the social value and the social purpose about the things that we do within our profession. So if you've not had the opportunity to sort of take part in that yet, I would, strongly suggest that you do. So as I say, we've talked a bit about the structure of the day. We can keep reminding you of these sessions throughout the day. If hopefully you'll stay for as much as possible. I'm here, but I've also got a number of colleagues in the background. We've got sort of Sarah, Sharon there who are keeping us in order, and we've got Lisa and Tara who are sort of helping with various social media and keeping people informed with links and so on throughout the day. So we've talked about, I'm going to just share my screen just now. I've just got a couple of PowerPoint slides that sort of go into some of the aspects that we're going to be covering today. So just bear with me 1 second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
We can see it, Jill. Thank you.
Brilliant. That's great news. Thank you. Okay, so I'll just whiz through these and then we can sort of get on with the first session of the day. So this was due to end sort of like soon for this for our networking session and our sort of scene setting. In terms of social media, I have briefly touched upon this, but one of the things that I would suggest that you do is, if you aren't already following some of CIH's main handles on Twitter and LinkedIn, here's some of the handles that you can sort of start to follow as a starting point. We're going to do a couple of quick polls sort of before we go into the main session with Paddy. And we've opted to do this in two ways. One, we weren't sure how many people would be here for the starting session, but we've done a sort of quick Slido poll. We've done two quick Slido polls just now, but we have also got the option for you to use the chat. So because there's only a small group of us here at the moment, what we might want to do, there's the QR code if you're interested in doing it through Slido. But in addition to that, we've also got the manual, the good old faithful way of being able to do it as well. So if I can just use this just as an opportunity to sort of get a bit of a steer from the audience that are here with us at the moment, and we'll do this sort of throughout the day. Looking at those options, just give us an idea of where exactly you are. Are you an advisor? Are you new to the housing profession? Are you looking at a career change? Are you a student, either on a CIH course or on a non-housing course? Or are you considering a change of career path? Or are you just inquisitive? So these are looking at the delegates we're expecting throughout the day. We're expecting to get quite a broad spread of our delegates taking part. So as I say, please do use the chat box to take part in that. And then the next poll as well, it's really helpful for us to understand how much you personally feel that you know about housing as a career of choice and about the different career paths and opportunities within this sector. This type of thing will help us to understand sort of where we can gauge things throughout the day as we go along, and also sort of help to measure any of those sort of developments throughout the day as we've sort of gone through our various sessions. So again, please just use the chat to sort of indicate what you feel your level of awareness and knowledge is of the opportunities in the housing sector. So I think from a sort of housekeeping point of view, I think we've sort of covered the majority of the things that I wanted to talk about. Sharon, I'm sure you will correct me if there is something that I've missed that I should have covered as part of the housekeeping. The only thing that I would just sort of point out is just keep referring back to the programme that you will have seen in terms of sort of getting a feel for what is the main focus of each of the sessions. So the session that we will have after the break, after Paddy's session, will be about sort of getting a better understanding of the types of organisations within the housing sector and the types of opportunities, and getting a better understanding about the way that those organisations are different and the ways that they work together or in partnership or are very similar. So I'm going to, this is the start now of our first session. So I'm going to sort of stop showing my screen now, and I'm going to take the opportunity to now, so I'm assuming you can't see my screen anymore. Is that right? Yeah, cool. Okay, so without further ado, it gives me absolute great delight to welcome our guest speaker today for this first session as part of National Careers Week and Let's Celebrate Careers in the Housing Profession. So I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Paddy Gray, OBE. I'm just going to give some details, very brief details about Paddy in terms of sort of describing him, and then I'll let him expand upon that if he wants to or not. But Paddy is a professor of housing. He is also a former CIH president. He is a fellow member of the Chartered Institute of Housing, and he is an OBE as well. Today's session is, we're going to cover quite a few things in it. It is very informal, and it's framed in discussion with. So Paddy and I are going to have a discussion, but I want you to get involved as well. So let's throw questions at Paddy while we've got him. And during his session, he's going to be able to sort of, share lots of his academic insight with us, and sort of expand upon his years of experience, applied experience. One of the things that we're going to make a start with is we want to go through and give an overview of the history of social housing. So Paddy, can I sort of hand the mantle over to you to sort of make a start on that and give us a brief overview of the history of social housing?
Okay, Jill, thanks very much, and thanks for the introduction as well. It's great to get talking to you, even though it is a small group. I mean, I think the aim of this is actually to get a message out, and something that I've dedicated myself to for over 30 years is I started when I was 5, of course, for over 30 years is to try and get young people to consider housing as a career. So the history of housing can be very long. It took me 3 years to teach it to degree students, but I suppose I can give, you could just segment it. I always find whenever I'm traveling on an overground in London, or traveling out to Heathrow, or traveling, not in the tunnels, of course, and you see the different types of housing that is in the capital. And again, driving in some of the major cities, some of the smaller towns, you see such a different type of housing, and you wonder, where did all that come from, and why is it so different, and why is it so diverse? And I mean, really, you could go back centuries, but I suppose the key thing was in the 19th century when at the Industrial Revolution, so many people moved into urban areas. They had to be housed. Now, many of the new urban centres, many of the new industries housed people, or sort of was really juxtaposed beside the actual industry themselves. But there was a lot of very poor conditions. And at the time, when we talk about pandemics and various things, at the time, cholera was a major concern. And of course, cholera doesn't confine itself to the working classes. So a lot of people who were in government at the time were very concerned that it spread because of the poor sanitary conditions and so forth. So we had an emergence of, I suppose, government intervention into housing, where it began with public health acts. And, housing has always been associated with health anyway. And then it moved into sort of how, it culminated in the Housing of the Working Classes Act, where government intervened and tried to get some form of housing being built for people in working classes. Now, there were a number of philanthropists at the time too, and at the Chartered Institute of Housing, we sort of modelled ourselves on Octavia Hill, who was probably one of the first, of the current housing managers. And many of what she did at that time still exists today, like tenancy agreements, and she harnessed a lot of investment in housing to try and house those people on very low incomes. And it sort of moved on since that. The First World War had a major impact. There were very poor conditions. People coming back from the war, they were worried about the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. They were worried that there might be something would happen in the UK. So the theme was homes fit for heroes. And there were a number of acts in the 1920s that encouraged the beginning of what was then council housing, what we now call social housing. And prior to that, over 90% of all housing was privately rented. Very little owner occupation and virtually no council housing at all. So you had this, a number of acts. You had the Addison, Wheatley, Chamberlain Acts, all encouraging both the public and the private sector to build for the, for people who needed those types of housing. And standards were a key to that. The Tudor-Walters report during the First World War actually recommended standards for that type of housing. Now, when I mentioned at the beginning, when I drive around England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, you find that type of housing, parter type housing that was built prior to during the interwar period, sort of semi-detached with gardens. Many of those have been sold off, since that through the right to buy. But there were council housing, very good council housing, very spacious council housing with lovely gardens. And I mean, a lot of that still exists today, of course. And then we moved into a period of refurbishment as well and slum clearance, where they wanted to get rid of all of the old slums. Problem with that was that people, although living in very poor conditions, had a community spirit, and they enjoyed the fact that everybody walked in everyone else's house. They enjoyed the fact that they could leave the key on their door. They enjoyed the fact that even though they were poor, even though they had very poor facilities, they really had a community spirit. Now, the problem with redevelopment, we have two concepts we use in housing: redevelopment and rehabilitation. Problems with redevelopment is you demolish, and you're not only demolishing the houses, but you're demolishing the communities as well. And that's always a difficulty when you do that. So you have to take decisions around, do you demolish a community, or do you maybe refurbish the houses to retain the community? And that debate has existed right up until today. Moving after the Second World War, of course, then you had actual damage to buildings. You had nearly 500,000 houses that were destroyed. You had very much concern about the housing conditions again. And even though it was a Conservative government were in at the time of the war, a Labour government came in under Clement Attlee and basically introduced the National Health Service, introduced pensions, introduced a number of things. And council housing again was seen as a solution. Now, at that time, they introduced temporary accommodation, which were known as prefabs. And I grew up in one in Armagh in Northern Ireland, and it did a a radio program for BBC One about the 20 tin houses that actually that I grew up in, and we called it Tin Town Kids. Now those properties were meant to only last for 10 years. They're still there, and they were built in the late 1940s, or assembled, should I say, in the late 1940s. So, you know, that was, so they used so many different types of accommodation to house people. In the 1950s, then they had serious problems with money, with trying to sort of build, so they decided to build high and build high density housing. Hence, we had all the high-rise blocks, and the problems associated with those since then, because although they were built, they were, at the time, they were called streets in the sky. People loved them. But then, of course, the building materials that were used weren't that good. They conducted cold instead of heat. People, lifts broke down. People were stuck up in maybe a 30th floor and couldn't get out. So there's a lot. That's the emergence of, you know, depression, loneliness, isolation, and, you know, and remote council housing where offices were in the centre of the cities. So, you know, in many ways, people didn't really feel connected. So you had that. I mean, I do a lot of work in Glasgow, and we have at Glasgow Housing Association, we have over 130 high-rise blocks. Some of them have gone up to maybe 30 stories high. So again, you know, it's seeing that different type of housing that was seen as a solution at the time. But then again, the unintended consequences of that was obviously poor housing, people wanting to move. So although housing is static and it can last for up to 100 years more, people's ideas and perceptions and demands change. They change with jobs. They change with, at the moment, we're going to have major changes in how people live after the pandemic. People will want to have gardens. People will want to have space. People will want to have an extra bedroom or an extra room to work at home. You know, so people will want to live in maybe 10 or 20-minute neighbourhoods. So all of these things have to be considered. So no matter what you do in housing, it really doesn't, it is never a solution. And in the 1960s, I'm just taking key moments. 1960s, there was an emergence of thought around homelessness. And there was a programme that was broadcast in 1966, black and white, called Kathy Come Home. Now, I still showed that to the students, and still they loved watching it. Didn't like the consequences that came out of it. You know, a family being separated because there wasn't enough housing, and at that time it wasn't dealt with by councils. So it took 10 years for the Homeless Persons Act to be introduced in 1977. And that in itself was a major milestone where councils became responsible for homelessness, and they had to house people who were deemed non-intentionally homeless. Now that's a difficult situation, because you could deem anyone intentionally homeless. I mean, it varied from council to council. Rent arrears could be intentionally homeless. Divorce could be intentionally homeless. Separation could be intentionally homeless. Some conservative local authorities at the time, and I'm not saying it's just conservative, but the word conservative would even said that pregnancy, single women getting pregnant, was a way of trying to get housing. So it was deliberate, and that's how crazy the whole thing got. So you know, the whole concept around homelessness and who is deserving and who isn't deserving, and of course, when you talk to people about homelessness, they think of people sleeping on the streets, but you know, it's a key to that is home. If it was people living on the streets, it'd be rooflessness or houselessness, not homelessness. So it's getting this concept of a home. And that's where the many of housing professionals would look at that. They don't look at housing as a house or a unit. Government statistics will talk about housing units, but people working in the sector, professionals, will talk about the home and wraparound services that they can actually give to someone living in a house to make it home. Communities, housing plus extra activities for relatives. And one other thing was the emergence of the right to buy, and when Thatcher came into power in Now I'm skipping over things because I'll be here all day. But 1979, she introduced she came in 79. She introduced the 1980 Housing Act, which in many ways was a good part of it, where it encouraged tenant participation and compelling local authorities at that time to talk to tenants and to find out what they want. But the other thing was the right to buy, where people were able to buy at substantial discounts, 60%, discounts. They were able to buy their homes, and they were able to buy flats at 70% discount. So, you know, massive discounts. What it did actually, it changed the whole nature of council housing, because those people in the better off houses, the better quality houses bought them. And then many of them have moved out. Estimates today say 40% of those are now being privately rented. So, you know, again, the unintended consequences of what was a good idea at the time, but many people became homeowners. Again, when you look at areas like London and people selling ex-council houses that they bought at 60% discount for £1 million, you know, so is that the right way to subsidise you know, people to live in their own homes and not subsidise others? All of these debates in housing are fantastic. And, you know, the attraction amount nowadays, the big providers of housing are housing associations or non-local authorities. And what another aspect of the Conservatives and the Labour as well was to promote stock transfers. So all of this council housing was built in the interwar period and the post-Second World War period, all came up for grabs. So in some cities and towns, local authorities transferred all of their stock to either one or a number of housing associations. Why did they do that? Simple reason is that housing associations can borrow money to put towards investment from private funds, where local authorities, if they borrow it, it goes towards public sector borrowing. So therefore they were reluctant to do that. But this was a way of bringing in private investment. Now, what has happened from that? Some of the law, I mean, I'm vice chair of Glasgow Housing Association, and we had our stock transfer in 2003. 90,000 properties transferred over to a new organisation. It had its difficulties at the time, but massive, and you know, not only new build, but retrofit, regeneration of areas, money that wouldn't have been there available from government that we were able to borrow. And the larger you become, the better your balance sheet, the more that banks and building societies will give you money at cheap rates. So in a way, like, you know, and people, if they're living in good accommodation and they're happy, they will pay their rents. And that's big, but rental payments become so important as well. Biggest issues now are affordability. The biggest issues are in some parts of the country about the decline in owner occupation, because owner occupation had risen so much that people wanted to own their own home. As Michael Heseltine said in the 1970s, people should take their place in the sun when the right to buy was introduced. So people want to aspire to live their own home, but you've heard the term now, the generation rent, because many young people can't buy their own home. They can't find the deposits. They can't, although the Chancellor this week has announced a scheme that would actually help them to move in and to buy again. But we have this pendulum that shifts from owner occupation to council housing or social housing and to private rented. And in some cases, people owning part of their home and renting the rest of it, which is called equity sharing. So we've had different periods and different times over the years. And I said, I've only skipped over it. I'm just giving you a view. So what I get excited about, and I know I'm very boring about this, but I get excited when I'm on the tube in London and not in the tunnel, when I'm on the overground. And I look at the different types of housing. The housing is so over 100 years. The new housing has been built by housing associations, by housing organisations in different boroughs. When I look at areas that basically, what I mentioned earlier about the redevelopment, where whole communities were dispersed in many cities, what they did was they built a social housing on the periphery because the land was cheaper. So you have places now like Baker and Newcastle, Hume and Manchester, Drumchapel, Castlemilk and Glasgow, all on the outskirts, all not connected. And the biggest issue in the last was to connect people, bring them back in, make sure that they get adequate sort of, they can use all facilities and they're not isolated at all. So, you'll see that in every, I could ask, because the audience is very small, I could ask anybody in your hometown, in your own city, do you know where the social housing is located? Yes, it's located at the outskirts. And although a lot of it probably has been bought off through the right to buy, but you have those very large estates then that had problems because of bad management practices. Chartered Institute of Housing introduced standards, introduced professionalisation. Everybody that I know that's a member of the Chartered Institute of Housing, I know quite a few, over the years, particularly as being president in 2010, 2011, which was a great privilege, as I was the first Irish president and the only still of the CIH. But passion was the big thing. People wanting to help others, people wanting to improve lives. People, it's like a dedication. They just want to help. So it's not only getting the salary, it's not only working for a living, it's passion. And I would always put it down to that. And I've never actually had anyone say that they didn't enjoy their career in housing. Yeah. So that's a quick sort of run through. Off the top of my head, of course.
Yeah. Paddy, that was absolutely amazing. And, please don't apologise at all. We could listen to you all day, honestly, in terms of understanding, your knowledge of the history of social housing and, those applications that you're able to make in terms of helping us to sort of understand the context. You mentioned Drumchapel. I was brought up in Clydebank, and which is down the road. So I was able to relate to that sort of scenario that you'd given in terms of the social housing there, and I was also brought up in social housing in Clydebank, so know that area very well. So thank you very much for that. Before we move on to any I've got so many things that I want to pose to you, but before we do that, does anybody have any particular questions for Paddy? Again, while we've got him here, while we've got him on the this stage, could you, if you've got any particular questions, could you just sort of use the icon hand or actually physically put your hand up, just so that we can get those questions to Paddy? Don't be shy. No? Okay, well, please just use the rest of this session as well to sort of think about whether there's any questions in particular you would like to ask of Paddy. Paddy, I'm just going to pick up on one of the points that you mentioned just before you finish, and you talked about the reasons that people choose a career in housing. And one of the things that you talked about passion, you talked about improving lives, and the whole principle about making a difference, and all of those plus other things, are about the characteristics of our profession. Absolutely spot on, and absolutely 100%. One of the things that I picked up this week as part of National Careers Week, and I talked about some of the activity that we've been doing during the week. One of the things we put out on Twitter on Wednesday, when we launched one of our polls or one of our questions that we're doing 3 times this week, was about, in 3 words, describe your career in housing. And some of the things that you've talked about, but particularly what sticks out here, is that word passion. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do as part of that is actually look at doing, sort of a word cloud, picking up on those words that people have used to actually talk about their career in housing, and passion and people, and that making a difference, and communities. They are all keywords that have come out time and time again. So, without shadow of a doubt, that is absolutely true. And, again, as the audience, please do use the chat to sort of, give us an indication what if you were to say 3 words that described your housing career, what would they be? This is all really helpful things for us. You talked also about the different providers in the sector. And so our next session, after our virtual break, our next session is focusing on that. And what we want to do in this next section is to give an idea about the different housing providers. We've not covered them all within the panel that we've got. We can't do that sort of as part of just this one event and this one session that we've got. But Paddy talked about stock transfer, you talked about housing associations and about sort of the funding that was accessible. In this next session, you will be able to find out more about that and get that better understanding of those different types of organisations. Paddy, can we talk a little bit more about professionalism?
Okay. I suppose Yeah, I suppose professionalism to me is about standards and about trust, and that people would actually, they trust that you will do what you say you're going to do. They will, that you are equipped to do that. If you think in terms of a doctor, you wouldn't want a doctor or a surgeon operating on you if they didn't have the skills and the qualifications to do so. I mean, the same with housing professionals. I mean, it's about behaviour and attitude. It's about, how they operate with integrity. They, as I said, they'll do what you say they'll do. And the standards is very important. That's something that, at CIH obviously takes very seriously, is through education and through housing standards and setting those standards that people must adhere to. And in many ways, anecdotally, when I speak to CIH members or spoken to them over the years, I mean, many of them are very proud of their qualifications. They're very proud that they put that effort in to become a housing professional, and they that's very dear to them. People in the street, when I go into housing estates, I would talk to a lot of consumer groups. I've been involved in advice, citizens advice. I've been chair of that for a number of years in Northern Ireland, and again, speaking to people, residents, they want people who are qualified to do what they're supposed to do, and they at the end of the day, that's important to CIH. So I suppose it's having a certain level of standards included in what a professional needs to be, and their own attitude, their own behaviour, how they work. We have a code of conduct that people work to. You have in many ways your appearance, that you appear as a professional, that you know what you're speaking. And again, referring back to Glasgow, we have at Glasgow Housing or at Wheatley, we have this policy of think yes. When people are out on the estates, when people are, that they can make decisions there and then, and not go through a whole rigmarole of having to go through various bosses in order to get something authorised. So it's being it's knowing your area and having integrity and honesty. Sorry for that waffle there, but I could think of many more things as well. But I'm trying to sort of, I suppose, the common denominator of all of that is standard and integrity.
Yeah. No, it's not waffle at all. It's really, really important. And I think, going back to one of those earlier points that you mentioned about, I think one of the things that we struggle with is because, you don't have to, our profession is so diverse, and I think sometimes that's one of the issues that sort of causes, that sort of question about, well, what is the housing profession, and all of those standards that you've outlined, and with the sort of formal introduction of the professional standards in terms of the framework, it is about integrity, it's about being ethical, it is about inclusiveness, it is about making sure that we're knowledgeable, making sure that our workforce is skilled, making sure that we are advocates for the housing profession, and that we're able to challenge things, and that we equip ourselves to be able to sort of challenge things that we think are wrong. And it's about our leadership as individuals and as a profession as well. And with everything that has gone on through COVID and continues to go on through COVID, if you look around and you read some of these stories in the press, and if you look at Inside Housing, you will see the things that you're doing within the housing profession, or if you're coming into the housing profession, housing professionals and housing organisations have been there on the forefront. As professionals, they have been making sure that, residents and the community are safe, and that they're being fed. If people are not able to go out and do non-emergency repairs, they've been helping with food parcels, and they've been helping in food banks. They've been making calls to vulnerable customers, all of that. And it's housing clearly is a profession with all of those characteristics, and has been there at the forefront of COVID. Without a doubt. Paddy, I don't know, do you want to add anything further? Adinik, you've got a question. Would you like to ask?
Yes, thank you. It is a question that has been bothering me. It is based on the professionalism, housing as a profession, like Paddy has mentioned. What it is that, like the NHS, doctors, nurses, housing, sometimes it is difficult for people to see it as a proper profession. It will take you time to explain to people on the street that housing is a profession. Why is it like that? Despite all our efforts and contributions in the society. Can you throw more light on that, please? Thank you.
It's an excellent point, an excellent question, and I suppose I agree with you totally. And I mean, over the 40 years now, nearly, that I've been involved in housing, that has been a major problem. And I've worked tirelessly with the Chartered Institute of Housing, with many other bodies, to try and put housing out as a profession. But to give you an example, whenever we had open days at university for people coming into careers, no one came to the housing stand at all. I was standing all day on my own with colleagues, and very few people came, and some came by mistake because they were looking for, as you said, nursing, or they were looking for engineering, or they were looking for other things. And that's part of this, is getting that reach out there. What is the chartered housing professional? No one has heard of it, except us, people who are in the profession. And, it's getting that reach to say, well, this is professional. We do our job effectively, basically. And you want people doing a job effectively. But when I do a lot of international work, and through CIH as well, because I sit, I'm their external examiner, so I sit on validation panels in other countries. So I've gone to Hong Kong, China, looked at they actually have it compulsory that people have a housing profession in Hong Kong, that they're actually a professional, i.e. CIH or others, before they can practice. So, if you look at other, they have to have a license, they have to have something to practice, and maybe that's something government should be considering. If you're an architect, you have to have you can struck off if you're, in the surveyor and so forth. So why not a CIH housing professional? And it's getting that reach. And events like this, it's getting it to young people, and it's getting it to residents and saying, look, this is a profession. I actually tweeted a couple of times during the pandemic that people should be out clapping housing professionals on a Thursday night, simply because they're as important as nurses. I'm not taking nursing down in any way, but they are. They're improving well-being, especially what Jill said there during the pandemic. I mean, the reach that people had, they worked from home, they used modern technology, they were constantly, in touch with their residents, they were in contact, and they were able to adapt to different situations. I mean, who expected this a year ago? And yet, I don't know of any housing organisation that didn't adapt and didn't, maintain their performance despite what had happened. So you're right. I wanted to be a recognised profession. Again, I've been in Ghana, I've been in Nigeria, I've been in many countries in Europe, I've been in Australia, I've been in Canada, speaking about the housing profession. They all know about the CIH, so they do. But it's different levels of what you need to practice. And I suppose if we could take the Hong Kong model, and China's going the same way, and we have courses, we have approved courses in Wuhan, you've all heard of. I was actually in Wuhan before anybody heard about it, but CIH, we have courses in Beijing and Shenzhen and Fuzhou and Guangzhou. And I mean, at the end of the day, so our reach is international. And that's another aspect of it. How do different countries work their housing system? And how do they work professionalism? Fascinating and fantastic, so. But I'm with you totally.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
I think I agree entirely with everything that you've just said, and it can be extremely frustrating, particularly when we understand, about there is that lack of awareness. I think one of the things that, we're not going to change things overnight, but I think that we are getting closer and we are doing a lot more in terms of, you know, how we are portraying the housing profession as a profession, you know, as and you know, a lot of the stuff that we're doing around professional standards, about our qualifications, about the social housing white paper and professionalism, you know, was throughout that. So lots of really exciting, challenging, but really exciting times ahead. And there's some stuff that, you know, that we can all do. We can't do this individually, but we need to do it individually and collectively. So some of the things that we can do, you know, sort of when we talk, when we get the opportunity to talk about our profession, when we get the opportunity to talk about what our organisations and our sector does, we need to grasp them by the hand and just sort of make sure that we do get that opportunity. And if there's things that CIH could be providing our members and others in the housing profession with the resources to be able to do that, you know, let us know. What we're doing this week is part of building up those resources to actually, this is, you know, we call this Let's Celebrate Careers in Housing Intentionally, because that's what we need to do, and that's what we are doing, and that's what we will do. You know, we're not apologetic for we are celebrating our housing profession and how key we are, you know, to individuals and families. Has anybody got, I mean, we've got so much that we could sort of talk about in this session. We've been using the chat. We can use the chat to continue to sort of talk more about membership, about various things that we're doing around the professionalism agenda, about qualifications as well. So we'll continue to put information about the qualifications that CIH, you know, runs. So, for example, you know, CIH is the largest regulated awarding organisation for housing in the UK. You know, we have qualifications from level 2 up to postgraduate. They are done at various universities, accredited centres, and through our housing academy. So we can provide lots of information as we're going throughout the day on that. But again, you know, if you've got any questions in particular, then let us know. Joseph, I see that you've got your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Just one for Paddy, after you talked about sort of regeneration and slum clearances in the 50s. What do you think the future of inner city communities are, just when it comes to retrofitting, or a mixture of retrofitting and modular methods of construction, rather than, say, demolishing being a big part of redevelopment?
Again, a very good question, Joseph, and I suppose you're asking me my personal opinion on this here. The you know, certainly the retrofit agenda is very important, and something that, you know, large and small organisations have to balance between new build and new supply. And most of the new build and new supply will be, you know, will adopt the green agenda and will adopt sort of the proper heating systems that we need in order to meet targets. And, you know, certainly the targets of 2030 that are coming in, that have been brought back in 2050. But at the end of the day, I don't forget about the existing properties, and don't forget that those need retrofitted as well, up to standards that are actually for new build. Now, again, many organisations don't have those budgets to do that, and particularly smaller ones. Like in the larger ones, I mean, in Glasgow, we put in millions in the sort of retrofit as well as our new build agenda. But smaller organisations can't afford that. So how can you meet those targets? And how can you bring, you know, you don't want to disrupt communities. You want demolition as a last resort, simply because you don't. But then again, when you look at things like fire safety, I don't know what's going on there. I think there's a wee bit of echoing coming in there. But I mean, when you look at Grenfell, and we look at what happened there, and I mean, you really want to make sure that safety is very important as well. But, you know, energy efficiency, simply because it puts more money in people's pockets. That, you know, that if they're using up less energy and they're having to pay for less energy as well, and of course, you know, but now we're talking about sort of good energy systems that retain heat and various things, and we're being told that you have to open your windows in case you've, because of coronavirus. How will we deal with that next year? I mean, with a new learning coming out of COVID, and I'm telling you that now because I'm getting my job in an hour and a half. So, so hopefully we're coming out of COVID And there will be a sea change of behaviours in the sense that people will want larger dwellings, people will want dwellings with space, people will want to work from home, people will want to have sort of, as I said at the beginning, 10-minute neighbourhoods where people can sort of, everything is there for them. Organisations will change to working in hubs as opposed to probably working in central offices. And you know, office space itself will become available. And what do we do with that? Do we regenerate inner cities by, you know, encouraging that to be repurposed into, you know, residential accommodation, student purpose accommodation? So much of it has been built, but many students have probably worked from home because all of the online teaching. So what happens? There's so many questions coming forward, and you know, professionals have to adapt to that and have to make sure in their strategic thinking that those are embedded in their plans over the next 5 to 10 years. Many of them are actually changing their strategic plans just to begin from 2021 to 2026 or whatever, simply because of that.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Paddy. Yeah, it's one of my projects I'm looking at currently, sort of our retrofitting plan, and it's all very, yeah, it's all quite cautious right now. We don't want to find out in a couple of years that we're doing the wrong thing. So I think it's probably a more cooperative approach across the sector rather than individual associations.
Absolutely, and it's about, in many ways, about you know, collaboration. You know, making sure that, you know, you have somebody, including residents. You know, just when you think of a lot of the gas installations that were introduced over the last 10 or 15 years, they're probably going to have to go and rip those out again, you know, because of the sea change in thinking as to what, you know, we want maybe heat sources sort of coming from the ground, you know, pumps and various things. And, you know, those are expensive. So making those decisions and writing those into your business plans are, you know, are difficult for many smaller organizations. Do they then collaborate with larger organizations to be able to sort of to work together in community, in areas that, you know, different players are, because that's what's happened. Housing has probably become fragmented in many ways. Prior to the sea change of stock transfers, councils operated in a full area, so they could do regeneration. They could do, I mean, in Northern Ireland, we still have the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, which is 90,000 properties, so they can do area regeneration. But when you have a different housing or associations operating in one area, plus the private rented sector, plus other occupation, how can you do area regeneration? And those thoughts have to be, and that's back to having professionals to think that way and to think forward.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So hopefully that was really, really helpful in terms of that answer to Joseph's question. So thank you for that, Paddy. I'm mindful of time. Elisa, I see that you've got your hand up.
And it was only because there was a question popped in the chat box, which I think might have got missed from Alina.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for that.
And that's okay. She just wanted to ask Paddy, Paddy, in your opinion, which country has the best housing model?
Oh, Northern Ireland. It's a very good question. I mean, I've been involved in so many different countries and their housing systems, and you know, there are different models. I suppose it's very difficult to say whichever is the best. You know, everyone has a quality, but it's important not to sort of be insular in our thinking. It's important to look at good practice in other countries and to try and sort of utilize mistakes that have been made, and in how we, you know, it's all about outcomes. What is the outcome of what you want to do? You want people to live safely. You want to improve well-being. You want to build good quality housing for the future. So let's look at other countries and see how they're doing it. Who got it right and who got it wrong, and that's the importance of international collaboration, and that's why the CIH has a reach. You know, we have a reach. I keep saying we, even though I don't have a very specific role in the CIH anymore. But I mean, hopefully everybody who's a member of CIH says we. So what do? We we look at other countries. We have a reach in Canada, we have a reach in Africa, we have a reach in Hong Kong, we have a reach in China, Singapore, we have a reach in Australia, you know, so we can, and on European, we have European conferences where people will come together and look at the qualities of each country. So I couldn't answer that as to where the best model is. But what I can say is that we can arrive at the best model by looking at others and looking where they got it right and where they got it wrong.
Thank you, Paddy.
I think you're on mute, Jill. Right?
You're on mute,
It had to happen, didn't it? Right at the end as well. So so Lisa, I was just asking, is that all of the questions that in the chat? Have we picked everything up now?
I think so, yeah.
Lovely. Oh, thank you. Well, Paddy, you know, I can't thank you enough for today. Thank you so much. It was such an informative session, and you know, I'm so pleased that, as I say, with recording this, what we've created is an additional resource for our promoting careers in housing. You know, what a great coverage of an introduction to social housing, our history and our profession as well. So and some great questions that have come in from you all. So thank you very much for that, everyone. Like I say, Paddy's got to go off and get his injection. So thank you, Paddy. You know, very much appreciated for all of your time with that, and thank you to everyone for your questions today. We're now going to have a quick networking break, so feel free to chat amongst yourselves, turn your cameras off, keep them on, go for a drink, grab a coffee and so on. And then we'll be back at 10:50 for our next session. So our next session will be focused on different types of organisations, getting that awareness of different types of organisations within the sector, and understanding more about sort of the roles and opportunities available. So we've got some great housing professionals as part of our panel, which is also chaired by CIH's president, Aileen Evans, as well. So see you all at 10 to 11. And again, thanks ever so much, everybody. So catch you all in a bit.
Thanks, Paddy.
Bye-bye, everyone. See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.